What is up, everybody? Rassie Erasmus' first Springbok squad has finally been announced, and today we'll be analysing the whole squad in detail, looking ahead to the tests against Wales and England. As always, welcome to Rugby Hemisphere. So last weekend, Rassie Erasmus announced his full 43-man squad to take on Wales and England over the next 4 weeks. And earlier on Wednesday, he announced his full starting lineup to take on Wales in Washington, D.C. on Saturday. There's plenty to discuss when it comes to his overall selection, so I'll be going through each position individually and try to understand why he's made certain selections. Kicking off with the props, I think it's safe to say all these guys deserve their place in the squad. You got the four experienced props of Mtawarira, Nyakane, Kitsoff and Lowe, who will most likely start or come off the bench in the test against England. And then the three uncapped players of Frans Malherbe, Thomas du Toit and Oxen Chair, who've all been exciting to watch this season. And I think it'll be great for them to grow under an experienced scrum coach like Peter de Villiers. Two names that might be disappointed not being included in the squad would probably be P.S. Skuman and Ruan Drea. I suppose both of them lost out really just because of their choice to go overseas. Moving on to the hookers, obviously there's a massive loss for South Africa, losing Malcolm Marx to injury. In my opinion, that's solely down to Swys de Bruin overplaying Malcolm Marx every single game for 80 minutes, so I think he was bound to pick up an injury. But luckily I think that makes Rassie's job of choosing Bismarck du Plessis much easier, simply because of the like-for-like replacement that Bismarck is for Malcolm Marx. The strength and physicality, especially at the breakdown, does make their playing styles similar, and it would help the Springbok setup as a whole, especially in the scrum. Once Marx has returned, for him to come back in then and play with a team that's used to that playing style already, it won't be a difficult switchover for the team as a whole then. Looking at the other hookers now, I think Chili Boy, Relapele and Akrafana Marve have both played exceptionally for the Sharks this season. I think it would be very difficult to choose between them who should play back up to Bismarck in the test series against England. But judging on what Rassie has chosen for the Wales test, I could probably bet on it being Relapele. Then turning to Bongi, I'm not completely sure why he's there, to be honest. I think he's had a season plagued with injury, and unfortunately, I don't see what he really offers to the team in terms of backup. He's not very experienced and hasn't played a lot of rugby, so I'm not too sure why Rassie has picked him. But otherwise, I think the other three hookers are very well chosen, and I think we should have good depth and experience when it comes to the test series. With the locks, again, I think there's big disappointment losing players like Eben Etzebeth and Lotte Jager. I think both of them, had they been playing now, would have definitely been chosen as the starting pair simply because of their physicality. Lotte Jager found massive form and been playing brilliantly with the Bulls this season, and Eben Etzebeth was playing fantastically at the end of last year. So I think that's a big disappointment for them in that perspective. Then we've got now players like Pieter-Steph du Toit, who's been chosen to lead that Wales test match. I think he's been slowly progressing in his form over the last few weeks and should play very well. Franco Mostert, he's been playing okay with the Lions, not a lot spectacular, not as much as last year, but he has not been chosen to go to the Wales test match, so I imagine that Rassie Erasmus has some plans for him to feature in the first game against England. But otherwise, I think players like Marvin Orie and Jason Jenkins, two exciting young talents, but unfortunately I don't suppose they would be there had Etzebeth and de Jager been fighting fit. And then finally, there's Archie Snyman, who has been absolutely exceptional the last 6 months with the Bulls. He played very well at the Currie Cup last year, and then this Super Rugby season he's been playing very, very well. He's been attacking the ball, being brilliant at the breakdown and making some fantastic runs, which has shown that he is definitely the man to start against England. He's been left in South Africa, so not going to feature in the Wales test, so I think that's definitely a clear indication and that Rassie wants him to start against England. Turning to the loose forwards now, Siya Kolisi has been named as captain for the Springboks, and in my opinion, that is the absolute correct decision that Rassie Erasmus has made. I still can't quite understand why he wasn't chosen as captain last year when Whiteley got injured, but hey, he's captain now. I think that people who question his form this season don't quite realise his leadership abilities. And to me, it's very clear that Rassie has chosen him as captain based on that rather than his current form. But you have to realise that if you look at his Test rugby performances last year, if he can replicate that in this England Test series, he would very quickly jump back up to that world-class player that he was last year. That, combined with his leadership abilities, definitely make him the ideal captain for the Springboks. Other possible candidates like Dwayne Vermeulen and Francois Lowe play overseas aren't really adequate to be captain of the Springboks. Handré Pollard was mentioned a few times to be captain, but Sia is captain of the Stormers. He's been playing fantastically the past 2 years, and I do think it's the correct decision to have him as captain. Looking now at the other loose forwards playing in the Wales Test match will be Dan du Preez, Ntoshe, Kwagga Smith, Carr and Mahoje. All five of them have been playing good rugby this season. However, I think they do fall under the group of Sia Kolisi, Jean-Luc du Preez and Dwayne Vermeulen, who will probably start as a trio of loose forwards in the England Test series. Also, I think had Roelof Smit and Marco van Staden not got injured in the Bulls match against the Brumbies last weekend, I think they would have made a few changes in the selection, maybe of Rassie Erasmus, because those two have been playing absolutely exceptionally and would also deserve their place in the squad. But looking at the Wales match, I think it'll be very interesting to see how Dan du Preez and Kwagga Smith fare. Nizam Carr wasn't chosen for the Wales Test match, but we'll get to see some of the other loose forwards, which will be pretty good in trying to establish who should lead that loose forward trio, because that was one of our biggest downfalls last year, is failing to identify three loose forwards who could consistently play game on game and lead a good side. Moving on to the scrum halves, this is one position where we can say for certain that Faf de Klerk will start for the Springboks against England. He's the only player out of the four scrum halves Rassie has selected to have caps, 11 caps in total. He's been absolutely sensational in England this year. Awarded Player of the Year for Sale Sharks. His game has definitely improved playing for the Sale Sharks in England. And unfortunately, I don't really think there was another option at scrum half for us, given our lack of depth at scrum half in South Africa. Looking now at the other three, you've got Ivan van Sail, who's been very good and consistent for the Bulls this season. Cameron Wright, who's been developing really nicely over at the Sharks. And Ambrose Papier, who has just this brilliant injection of pace into the game, very similar to Faf de Klerk. And I'm very, very excited to see how he develops at the Springboks. The choice at fly-off is also fairly simple for Rassie Erasmus. Handré Pollard has simply laid down the marker for all other fly-offs in the country. His vision, his clarity of the game has been absolutely superb this season, and it would be foolish not to pick him to start against England. Elton Jantjies has, as usual, played very well for the Lions. If he can replicate that at Test level is debatable, to say the least. But we'll see how he fares with Rassie. I'm sure Rassie can bring the best out of him. And then there's Robert du Preez. He's been sensational off the boot, and we'll get a taste of what he can do when he comes off the bench to play against Wales on Saturday. For his centres, Rassie has chosen the likes of Lucanio Arm, Jesse Creel, Andre Esterhuizen, Frans Steyn and Damien de Allende. Because Rassie hasn't chosen de Allende to go to the Wales Test match, I am safe to assume that he will most likely start against England in 2 weeks' time. And for me, that would be a huge coaching blunder, because in the past I've talked about Damien de Allende as, despite his physicality, his incompetence when it comes to making decisions on field, which makes me question even his inclusion in the Springbok training squad. If you watch my analysis of the Ireland game against the Springboks last year, you'll have seen me go into depth about de Allende's decision making on that day. When the Stormers played the Bulls earlier this year, Sport 24 and Super Sport consistently wrote about Damien de Allende as being this resurgent player and coming through and having this form that he displayed in 2015, which, if you analyse his gameplay, is total rubbish. Even in that game where they talk about him as being resurgent and playing fast and expansive rugby and having all these hand skills. Look here, alright, all he's got to do, he's got to run straight. No, he doesn't. He runs sideways and cuts out all of Pieter-Steph du Toit's space. And it's only through Ramon Samuels' strength that this try has been scored. Look here, all he's got to do is run perpendicular to the try line. No, he doesn't. He keeps running to the touchline. Where are you going, dude? You're cutting out all your teammates' space. Pieter-Steph du Toit is a double back, and it's only through Ramon Samuels coming in at pace that the try is scored. Had that try been scored, game could have been swung. So for de Allende, I really think that he has to work on his decision making in play before he's considered for the Springboks again. Apart from that, I think the inclusion of the other four centres is completely justified, and it'll be very interesting to see who Rassie picks to start against England. As it looks now, it'll probably be Lukhanyo outside centre, partnered either with Damien de Allende or Frans Steyn at inside centre, but we'll have to see. Finally, we're going to look at the outside backs, and in particular the full-back position, because if I'm being truthful, I have no idea who Rassie is going to pick to start at full-back against England. But at wing, we've got Deanti, Ishmael, Nkosi and Mapimpi, all four very talented wingers and absolutely deserve their places in the squad. Rassie has decided to take Mapimpi and Ishmael to the Wales test in Washington, so I think you can probably assume that Deanti and Nkosi will start at 11 and 14 against England. That sounds pretty simple. But then moving to fullback position, we've got three brilliantly talented fullbacks, Cohen Bosch, Willie le Roux and Warwick Gelant. And I really don't know who he's going to pick. Starting with Cohen Bosch, he's had an absolutely brilliant season with the Sharks. His defence has improved a lot after last year's Currie Cup blunder that he had in the final. But his attack is brilliant, his stepping, his work, his ability to spot space, his kicking, especially his kickoffs have really helped the Sharks to get those quick starts. And the fact that Rassie has picked him to start at fullback against Wales is a strong indicator that maybe he favours him over Warwick Gelant, which I think is kind of odd because you would have thought Warwick to start and Cohen to be on the bench because Cohen can cover both fly-half and fullback, which frees up another spot on the bench, maybe for another centre. But now looking at Willie le Roux, he's had a brilliant few seasons over in England for the Wasps. He's ironed out a lot of the issues he had before with managing a game and decision making in play, and he looks to be in fantastic form, and therefore it would be hard to choose him not to start against England given his experience, which the Springbok backline last year really lacked, and I suppose they'll definitely need it to play against England. And then looking at Warwick Gelant, who has just been absolutely superb this season for the Bulls. The way he reads the game, it's fantastic. He can use both his left and right boots. He showed this to Rassie Erasmus in the match against the Sharks, scoring 3 tries. It's brilliant the way he reads the game. His reading of the game definitely links to a player like Ben Smith in his early days. So I think we can be very excited about his talent. But it'll be interesting to see who Rassie picks out of the 3 of those fullbacks. And this weekend, I think we'll definitely be able to see which of the 2, Warwick Gelant or Cohen Bosch, will perform better at test level for the Springboks. Now that we've gone through the whole squad, I've put up here the team that Rassie has picked to face Wales on Saturday against a team that I think he will put up against England the week after. The England team is made up mostly of the players that he left in South Africa and didn't take to the Wales tests, but there are some switchovers like Pieter-Steph du Toit in the scrum. However, if you look at this closely, I think you can iron out the statement that Rassie gave saying that the Wales side is not a B team. If you look at it closely, I think it undoubtedly is just who he's picked, the number of caps they have. Pretty much half the Wales team has never played in Test rugby before. So despite the coaching team consistently insisting that it's not a B side, I think you have to conclude that it is, and it's more of a match just to blood new players. But nevertheless, it'll be very interesting to see how they play. And because very few of them have played in Test rugby before, I honestly have no idea how this match will pan out. Wales have picked a side which won't field many of their big guns, George North being the player with the most caps, but Dan Biggar and Alan Wyn-Jones won't be there. So I think it's a really hard one to call. But if the young guns in the Boks side stick to their talents and don't get overwhelmed by the occasion, I think the Boks will sneak in by about 7 to 10 points. Otherwise, if they don't keep their heads screwed on, it could be a disaster on the scoreboard. But thanks very much for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do comment below. I'd love to hear what you think. Should Dialende be in the Springbok squad? And who should start at fullback for the Springboks against England? Please go and check out my blog. I do a lot more in-depth analysis there. Like and subscribe, and go Bokke!